Welcome to the Good Mood Show. I'm your host, Matt O'Neill. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so that you can get a good mood every single week. And today we are talking with Dr. Stephen Post, who wrote Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People, which was praised by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. He's also the author of God and Love on Route 80, which received praise from Deepak Chopra. And man, Dr. Stephen Post, it is such an honor to be having this conversation with you today.
Well, it's an honor to be with you, Matt.
Specifically, what you're going to learn today is about my favorite topic Stephen talks about. He wrote a book called When Good Things Happen to Good People. And it's about how giving is actually good for you. And be sure to stick around to the end. Stephen has an exercise that will help you maintain your good moods and good health. And it's lessons that he learned from his partnership and friendship with the great philanthropist, Sir John Templeton. He also has a free resource that he's offering. It's the 8 kindness affirmations as a PDF. If you're already a subscriber to the Good Mood Show newsletter, I'll email you a copy. And if you're not, no worries. You can download it instantly at goodmoodshow.com, signing up for the newsletter, or just reach out on the contact page and we're going to send it over to you. But Stephen, I'd love to just get into this topic of how giving is actually good for you. And I know you had mentioned you're working on a book called Give and Live Better. Why is giving so good for us?
Well, giving with kindness. It's not just the external action, and the science demonstrates this very clearly, but you've got to have some heart in the game. It's not how much you give, but it's how much kindness or love you put into the giving. And in general, that is beneficial for all kinds of reasons, and across all of the lifespan, for anybody and everybody, but it's also very beneficial for people with certain kinds of illnesses as well. So it's something to be aware of and to teach your kids. It's very important. So how does this make a difference? Well, we did a study once, for example, on widows and widowers. These are people who had been married for many, many years, and happily so. That's an important caveat. And the ones who could self-report that they were helping others in the neighborhood or through their faith communities, maybe their church, their synagogue, their spiritual community, that they were engaged in that sort of activity, they got through a process of grief and, in some cases, severe bereavement more quickly and in a more enduring fashion. So I got a call from the local New York City Society of Widows and Widowers. There is such a thing. They invited me to come in and give a talk at their meeting. They have an annual meeting. And this was at a hotel somewhere on 7th Avenue in a big ballroom. I gave a talk. And at the end, we had Q&A, and a fellow in the back of the room frantically waved his hand. And he said, "I don't care what you say, buddy. I don't do nothing for nothing." There are nice people in New York, don't get me wrong. but on the other hand, I knew I wasn't in Cleveland. So, or probably Charleston, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because even though science demonstrates time and time again how helping others gets the mind off the problems of the self, allows us to expand the canvas so that when we have difficult moments, we can see beyond them, kind of like a Jackson Pollock painting where he would throw a gob of goo on the floor, and by the time he was over and covered it with beautiful colors, it was a work of art for the museum. So life is an expanding canvas, and kind giving is the way that you do that. You look at every situation, and no matter how bleak it might be for the moment, you manage it and you make the most out of it. And so kind giving is always good. It's good for mental health. It's good for physical health. It's even good for longevity. So the book, Why Good Things Happen to Good People, How to Live a Happier, Healthier, Longer Life by the Simple Act of Giving.
I read this book that was written in the 1950s called Try Giving Yourself Away.
Nice title.
And it was about what you're talking about. And he said that he called it a glow. He said, when you do something nice for someone else, you are surrounded with a glow, like a halo, that follows you around in a joyful expression that you've done something good for someone else. And he said it could be anything. It could be giving someone a compliment. It could be writing a nice letter to somebody. It could be holding the door for somebody. And the bigger the act of giving, the bigger the glow. And he said, here's the key. And this is what really stuck with me from the book. He said, you cannot hesitate. So if you see an opportunity to give immediately and without hesitation, because your brain will come in a second later and start to tell you all the reasons why you don't have time, or you don't have the money, or you don't have the this, or you don't have the that to give. So as soon as you see the opportunity, take it immediately and give, and you will be blessed.
Well, it is said, 'tis more blessed to give than to receive. We inhibit our natural capacity when it comes to empathy and kindness. All the studies of toddlers, of 1-year-olds and 1.5-year-olds indicates that by nature, they are empathic and want to be kind to one another. They can't necessarily operationalize that yet, but it's there. And this is Paul Bloom at the Yale Child Studies Center has written a lot of successful studies and books about this. So there's a lot of goodness in the heart of a child. The problem is that we push the wrong buttons. So that's why in the family, you've got to have support for this. You've got to have good role modeling. You've got to have a center of family values that's nicely articulated, that everybody can share in and they can navigate challenges with. Certainly. It's good to be good, but we do need to push the right buttons and give people the encouragement and the opportunity. And volunteering in adolescence has been shown to be very helpful, but across the life cycle, it's been helpful as well. So there's a lot to be said, and I think most people are commonsensically aware of this, but somehow the negativity of the culture, sort of, particularly the intellectual world, in the sense that many great philosophers, from Sartre to you name it, biologists, the selfish gene, they try to teach us that somehow at core, we're just really selfish creatures, and we shouldn't have any confidence in our kindness and its legitimacy and authenticity. And that's just wrong. And fortunately, in the last, say, 25 years, it's really been proven to be wrong. So now a lot of scientists are doing great work on the many manifestations of love, and it's bearing a lot of good fruit.
You talk about the universal mind quite a bit, and how we have a drop of this divinity inside each of us. And it's my thought that this drop of divinity is the source of our unconditional love that we can offer to others. How can we access more of this unconditional love in our daily lives?
Yeah, so that's a really great comment. I'm not a big believer in human nature strictly on its own. I read the newspapers. And there's clearly a shadowy side of human nature, and it makes us capable of some of the most unbelievably horrific actions and intents and statements and so forth.
And me too, and I'm part of human nature.
Yeah.
I was just contemplating this morning as I was caught ruminating over someone I feel has harmed me. And like how I don't think they're that nice of a person. And all of a sudden I woke up from it and said, well, I have that exact same nature to be unkind in me. and it exists. The darkness of humanity, I believe, exists in me and you and all of us as well. And so does this unconditional love and this drop of divinity exists in all of us. And it's just, or am I choosing the unconditional love today or not?
Well, it is a choice. I think that most of the great spiritual traditions will talk at some point or another about a universal mind, or one mind that underlies all of reality, that that is evident in the beauty of nature and even in the order of the cosmos itself. But it dwells in a very special way within each one of us. And as Sir John Templeton used to say in a Christmas card to his friends, are you aware that your mind is a gift? It's not just derived, he felt, from brain, from tissue, from cells, but rather the brain is kind of a home for the mind, but the mind precedes matter. The mind is part of this universal mind. As the physicist Erwin Schrödinger said, Nobel Prize laureate, there is only one mind. We think there are many minds, there's ultimately only one mind. And fortunately, we each have that little drop or grain of that within us. You can call it a soul/mind if you want, but that's where our truly beautiful, inspired love comes from. And it often feels almost invasive. I actually, just so that people have a half a chance of understanding what I'm saying here, are we, by the way, just recording this, or is it visual too?
It's visual too, and
Okay,
it's fine.
okay.
We could take a little break here.
No, that's okay. At any rate, where is that? Okay, take a little break. You can cut this.
Yeah.
Where is this? I want to read this. That's beautiful. Wait a second. Yeah. Why don't I have that book here? It should be right here, and I don't have it. Okay. Well, anyway, I think I'm being annoying, aren't I?
You're not ever unconditional. I'm unconditionally loving, patient, and compassionate.
And you can edit this.
Yes.
Thank God. Okay. So here's what I want to read. Hold on one second. Okay. And I'm going to tell a little story off it too.
I love that.
So this is one of my favorite quotes of all time. Just hold on one second. Okay, and then we can start going again. Okay. Okay, so let's start up.
Okay, ready.
Okay, so we talk about the one mind and the love of the one mind. This is really something you can equate with God, with the supreme, with ultimate reality, with whatever you prefer. My favorite expression of the experience of this one mind and its infinite love comes from the great poet W.H. Auden. And he spent a lot of time at Oxford University. This is what he said. One fine night in June 1933, I was sitting on a lawn after dinner with 3 colleagues, 2 women and 1 man. We liked each other well enough, but were certainly not intimate friends, nor had any one of us a sexual interest in another. Incidentally, we had not drunk any alcohol. We were talking casually about everyday matters when quite suddenly and unexpectedly something happened. I felt myself invaded by a power which, though I consented to it, was irresistible and certainly not mine. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly, because thanks to the power I was doing it, what it means to love one's neighbor as oneself. I was also certain that, though the conversation continued to be perfectly ordinary, that my 3 colleagues were having the same experience. In the case of one of them, I was later able to confirm this. And here we go. My personal feelings toward them were unchanged. They were still colleagues, not intimate friends, but I felt their existence as themselves to be of infinite value, and I rejoiced in it. So you see that metaphor of invasion, that somehow his consciousness is part of a larger consciousness. And he felt transformed in that moment. I had that experience right here in my office in this medical school once. There was a young Korean American lady from Queens who was a medical student, and she knocked on the door and she wanted to talk to me, but I said, look, I'm scheduled for the day and maybe email me and we'll talk next week. But something pushed me. I just felt almost as though I was being awakened. I even turned around and there was nothing to see, but I just felt somehow that I was supposed to drop everything and spend time with her. So I did that. I said, wait a minute, sit down. And I canceled a lot of appointments. And then we spent a few hours together. And it turned out she was really on the edge of despair, was about to leave medical school. And I wound up spending a lot of time with her. My wife and I would go into Queens and visit her on a monthly basis and take her to a Korean restaurant. And we became very good friends. Her mother had nothing. She was really a woman who was a housekeeper in some of the various areas around Queens. But this young lady came back to medical school. She did drop out for a year. She came back. She did really well. She even did her residency in my area here. And now she's a physician. She's fully licensed. She's gotten married and lives in Connecticut and has a nice house and a newborn baby. So the thing is that wasn't coming from me. My mind was, I've got to reschedule this and I've got to get from point A to point B, and I've got all these people to see today. And the last thing I want to do is interrupt that.
Right.
But it didn't come from me. It came from beyond me. And that's what Austin is talking about. Other example of that, which is in God and Love on Route 80, when I was at Reed College, where Steve Jobs slept on my floor, by the way, and we read the autobiography of a yogi together.
Oh, cool.
He was really an interesting guy. So I knew it when he was a youngster. But one evening, I was sitting in the Reed College coffee shop, Portland, Oregon. And it's about, say it's 9 o'clock at night, and a guy comes bounding through the door, and he looks kind of bright-eyed and lit up. And he yells out, "My name's Andy. I've got a brand new Harley Davidson shovelhead. Who wants to go for a ride on the fastest motorcycle on earth?" And like a fool, I said, "I'll go." So I went out. I got on this motor. I'd never seen this guy before. And it doesn't snow in Oregon. Sometimes it does a little bit. But it gets wet, and if it's cold enough, the wet will turn into slush. So this guy, he took off. He hit about 140 miles an hour in 2 minutes. He went through every stop sign, every red light, got on the Pacific Coast Highway. He hit 180 going down toward California, and I was crying. I thought I was dead. He was sliding away in this incredibly dangerous way, and he was looking into the sky at times, and the rain was pouring down on him. And he finally had a little mercy, and he did a crazy U-turn over the Midway, and he drove me back, also at 180 miles an hour, right back to the little parking lot in front of the Reed College coffee shop. So I got off his motorcycle and I stumbled. I couldn't walk much, but I managed to get across this bridge to my dormitory, Ackerman dormitory. And I crossed the threshold, and there was a payphone on the wall. Now, a lot of your listeners don't know what a payphone is. Most do, I guess, but not too many do. Depends on how young they are. But I never picked up the phone when it rang. This is in the foyer as you go up the stairs to your room. But somehow or another, I felt pushed to pick up the phone. It's not like I wanted to pick up the phone. My parents couldn't get a hold of me in a month of Sundays. but I just felt like I had to pick this up. So,
So
and notice this,
the payphone is ringing as you're
uh,
coming off of this crazy ride where this guy was
crazy.
going 180 miles an hour through red lights, and you could have died, and you're walking back to your room to go lay down and figure out what happened, and the payphone is ringing.
Yeah, I thought I was dead. I really did think I was dead. And so I felt this energy, this push to pick up the phone, which was strange and uncanny. So I picked up the phone. I said, hello. Now, understand, it's 2 o'clock in New York because now it's 11 o'clock West Coast time.
2 a.m. or 2 p.m.?
2 a.m.
2 a.m.
2 a.m. And that is my mother. And she says, Stevie, thank God you're alive. I just woke up. I had this premonition that you were dead. I'm sweating. And are you okay? And I said, Mom, I'm okay, but I thought I was dead. And we talked about that for a while. And my mom was a little bit of an Irish mystic. And we figured out that there is this kind of a one mind that connects us, because she was 3,000 miles away. You know, we were separated by Rocky Mountains and all of the above, but somehow she had this premonition. And these are not uncommon among mothers who hopefully love their kids.
The same thing happened with my wife and I.
Really? Okay, so I want to hear about that. But so my mom and I had a conversation about the notion of the one mind, or a universal consciousness, that somehow she picked up on this, and it couldn't be explained in any kind of clear way, but it was a mystery, and we should take it seriously, that the mind is more than matter. The mind isn't just derived from brain, but somehow the mind is its own stuff. But I want to hear your account.
Oh, very similar. So when I met my wife, the first time we met, we were having a drink at this bar, and I was struck with a knowing that it wasn't you're going to get married. It wasn't anything like that. It was just this knowing that was from out of my mind that I was going to know her very deeply. And it was just, I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of strange that I have had this feeling. We had a second date, and it went really well. And then she had to go off to a trip, and she was taking a plane to go off on this trip. And I was feeling really great about the relationship and where it could go, and she was too. And I was driving back from a friend's bachelor party from North Carolina back to South Carolina. And all of a sudden I was struck with this knowing again that she had died in a plane crash, that the little plane she had taken from Charleston to Clemson had crashed. And all of a sudden I'm just heartbroken. I'm driving in my car, and I know that she's crashed in this plane crash. And I'm like, that is really not the way I wanted that story to go. And 2 hours later, she calls me and she said, I just crash landed in the small Cessna we were in. The engine had completely stopped. We were way in the air. The pilot wet himself. He was so scared. My best friend is screaming, we're going to die. We're going to die. And all of a sudden my mind locked in on you. And I thought that was really tragic, because I thought this was going somewhere.
Wow.
And it's the same. Your mom, you had sent a message to your mom. You two were so connected that she just picked up the message that you were dying and your terror. And of course, she loves you so much. She wanted to make sure you were okay. I also picked up on the messages my mom locked in on me, or as Katie locked in on me.
And this is so interesting. So the fellow in England during World War I, excuse me, who actually came up with the idea of there being brain waves, only thought about that because his daughter had this very sad premonition that his son had been killed on the battlefields in France, and that had actually occurred. So there are many stories like this. Even Sir John Templeton, who I knew for quite a while, he'd gone to Yale. By the way, he was from Winchester, Tennessee. And he was in his teen years. He went out on a farmer's field and he asked a farmer, do you know if there are any good colleges I could go to? And the farmer said, well, John Marks, I heard of a place called Yale. So Templeton wrote a letter to Yale and said, could I ever get in there? And they responded, yeah, but you'd have to take calculus and European history. He said in another letter, they don't teach that here. If I taught it myself, could I get in? And they said, well, maybe. So he did that and he got in. And then a couple of months as a freshman, he got a letter from his dad that said, dear John, it was the Depression. We can't provide you with a single penny more. And he became the most famous poker player in Yale history. And of course, he became a famous investor, but that was only because he was such a good poker player, because there's something about gambling and stocks that resonates, you know. But he, after he got done with Yale, he took a, this is, you know, before World War II, he took a trip to Israel, which was that time not the state of Israel, but it was a territory. And he was living for a while, for a few weeks, with some close friends. And one night, their home was attacked by some terrorists, and Sir John had to run away. And his mother, way back in Franklin County, Tennessee, not too far from the University of the South, she had this premonition that Sir John had died. And she was so strong that she took her tin of all the letters he'd written her over the years, and she burned them up. And of course, there were no cell phones. So he does finally get back, and she's completely relieved to see that he's alive. And of course, they can't get the letters back, but his son, Jack, who was a surgeon at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, said to me, can you imagine if we had those letters? But these things are so commonplace. And what I like to say is that, you know, our minds are so much more mysterious. There's a great, I've been down to southern India quite a few times, and there's a story about a wonderful guy named Ramanujan, who was a 13, 14-year-old kid. He had no background in mathematics at all. And he would be praying at the foot of his goddess, and he'd get these inspirations, these formulas, and he'd write them down with his finger in the dirt. And then later on, he'd come back and he'd put them into a notebook. So if you go to Trinity College, Cambridge University, in the middle of the library are the notebooks of Ramanujan, because they are the basis of quantum physics. And no one disputes that. And when they found out about some of his writings, they invited him to come to Cambridge. He never finished his DPhil, his doctoral degree, because they wanted him to prove this stuff. He didn't think he had to prove anything because this had been given to him. It was a gift. And amazingly, you know, Ramanujan is considered to be the greatest mathematical genius of the 20th century. But all of this came because he was inspired. So his creativity didn't come from his own mind, he felt, but it kind of came into his mind from outside of his mind. And Einstein, his Gedanke meditational experiments, Einstein didn't think that he came up with a lot of his theories. He thought that somehow they came into him. He would play violin, empty his mind, you know, of clutter, and then he'd be just there meditating for an hour and a half, and he would jot down these incredibly brilliant ideas. So where does our creativity come from, and where does our love come from at that high level?
Yeah.
I'm not sure it comes from just us.
No, our brain, you know, if I think about the human brain, it's more like a filing cabinet. So if I'm looking to solve a problem with my intellectual thinking brain, it is basically anything that's already stored in there. It can calculate all the stuff, all the experiences I've already had. Well, then I'm going to create a future that's just like my past, but I want to continue to progress. So every morning I wake up and I meditate myself to empty my mind of thoughts. And then I pray to God to insert in my brain anything that would be the most helpful and serve the greatest good for that day. I pray before this conversation with you that the way it goes and the way it turns is going to be the greatest benefit to the person who's listening to it. because that's where these quantum leaps, as we
Yes.
talk about quantum physics and what Einstein was able to come up with. Edison, the great inventor, used to fall asleep with a spoon in his hand. And when the spoon would hit the ground, it would wake him up. And whatever had come to him in this dream state, he would write down. And his greatest inventions came from outside of his mind as he was falling asleep.
So that's fantastic. I love what you're saying. How about Edison? So I spent 20 years in the medical school at Case Western University. And Edison's birth home is in an Ohio town, Milan, Ohio, Milan. It's about an hour due west of Cleveland on Route 80, of course, and my favorite highway. So he grew up on a farm, and it's still open. It's a museum. It's his birthplace. He was thrown out of school when he was 11.
Yes.
They tossed him out because somehow they didn't think that his mind was any good. He couldn't fit in, quote, fit in. They didn't think he had any linear rationality to speak of. And he had a mother. His mother happened to be Christian, and she loved him a lot. And so he came home, and she said, why don't you tinker in the barn, and maybe you can be a light to the world, quote unquote.
Mm.
And of course, that's how it unfolded. But this is a guy who really just, his mind was what he would have told you that he was receiving all kinds of inspiration. And I think that that's probably the case. So inspired creativity is something that we have to really take into account. And the mind is more than just tissue and brain. People call it non-local mind. Deepak Chopra, non-local mind. There's something about our mind that is completely beyond matter.
So I want to make this practical too, as the person who's listening is hearing these very big concepts of one mind and non-local mind. How can we apply this to today? How can we apply this idea of giving, even when it doesn't feel practical to do so, and to compassion and kindness when it doesn't feel right to do so? How can we apply that to our everyday life?
Well, that's actually easy. So at least it can be easier than it sounds. What I do is I get up early in the morning. I get up probably at 5 every morning, even earlier, and I meditate for an hour or so. I will also pray. And I do it early in the morning because the rabbis from the old millennia, the Hasidic rabbis and all of the great Hindu gurus and so forth, they said the early morning's a special time, because your audience will get this. When you wake up early in the morning, you have a sense of being beyond time, because you're not locked into chronology yet. You're just sort of, wow, it's early morning, and it could be any time. And you have a sense of being beyond place. I mean, I get out of that bed, the bed could be in Cleveland, it could be in New York, it could be in Charleston. And so as the Hindus say, but as Christianity also says, God is beyond time and place. And so the original mind is the creator of the universe and the creator of time and place, but it's not itself originating in that. And so early in the morning is a very good time to do these kinds of spiritual practices. And then what I do is I think about all the people I'm going to meet over the course of the day, which is a lot of people. I mean, every day in my life is full of things. And in the medical school, I typically don't talk about these themes. I'm doing other kinds of things, but I bifurcate my life a little bit. I have some boundaries. And so I have the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love over there, and I have my day job in the medical school teaching ethics and humanism and compassionate care, which is also very valuable, but that's a different universe, although they're interlocked clearly. So I will imagine in my mind the people I'm going to meet. I know I'm going to meet this person at 8 and this person at 9, and then I have this class from 10 to 12, and then I'm going to run into this fellow named Matt on his radio program, and then I've got this thing going on at 3 and at 5, and I've got to do this and that. So I actually envision the encounters I'm going to have, and I have a sense of what people need. What expression of love do they need? Because love itself is so abstract. And what are we really talking about? Designer jeans, chocolate, whatever. But this is the deeper kind of love of humanity, and it has many expressions. So I have a sense that this person needs forgiveness. Maybe they made some big medical mistake last week and they're thinking about quitting nursing. And I'll say, yeah, I'll kind of figure it out. Those who make no mistakes make nothing. It's actually an MLK quote. And then someone else might need some compassion. Someone else might need some kind of mirth because they're sort of down and out. So I'll come in this building and I'll have in mind a very tasteful, uplifting, brief, quirky joke, which I'm known for. But I think that you want to think about what people need, what expression or what manifestation of love would be beneficial to them, and try to approach them in that way. And it can be very helpful. But all of that is pretty inspired in a lot of ways. It's not as though I always know exactly what's going on in people's lives, but my intuition is that, this person could use a little, and here's a word I coined with M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled. We were pretty good buddies. Carefrontation. Not confrontation, but carefrontation. You're going to stay with somebody, you're going to be loyal, but you got to kind of keep them on their straight path a little bit because they're veering away. So, you just have to have a sense that you're being helped by this universal mind in your interactions over the course of the day. And believe me, things will go a lot better if you take. Now, doesn't mean that when I come into work, I'm perfect, because there's a yellow light. You have to turn left at this light to get to the medical school. And a lot of people just stop at the yellow light when they really don't have to. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know.
So I'm capable of falling full chested on my horn, and I don't yell out an expletive, but I can get really upset by that. So you're not going to be perfect, but in general, if you work at the spiritual side of it, you can be kind and you can be generous, and you can be fairly wise in how you express kindness. And that's what you need to do. But it has to be grounded in this sense of a one mind that's more creative and knowledgeable than you are.
You had said that love never fails. And this conversation has been about love and giving. What is this love never fails? What does that mean to you?
Well, it means that it never does. But listen, when I came to this place 14 years ago from Cleveland, and I wasn't particularly happy about some of the reasons behind leaving, although they really wanted me to come here and start a program on compassionate care, and that sounded good. There was a cub reporter from a local paper called the Three Village Herald, and she had found out that I'd started this institute with Sir John on pure unlimited love, and it had gotten a lot of attention, even Oprah and so forth. And so she had actually called the dean of the medical school, who's a nephrologist, and my department chair, and said, "Why are you hiring this guy who's all about unlimited love?" And they were really bright. They said, "No, we're not hiring him for that. He can keep that a little bit separate, but we think he can do all the things that he's well known for in terms of medical humanism and teaching communication skills." And so the story is, I get onto Long Island off Route 80. I'm at the Three Village Inn. It's a terribly stormy night. It's middle of the summer. And my son who's with me and my wife, they're getting texts from people back in Cleveland. Where are you? Where are you? And my son just, I of course, we talked about relocating, but it hadn't really dawned on anybody quite powerfully. So it was the worst half hour of my life, and they were screaming at me. And I said to myself, there's nothing I can do about this. Why don't I go out and get some pizza? So I went out in the car, and I came across Little Joe's Pizzeria. I walked through the foyer, and there it is, the Three Village Herald, with one headline on the front page, just one headline, big letters: unlimited love comes to Stony Brook. And I practically died, because that's that, and it was a very difficult time, a difficult moment. And so the next day I called the president of the university who had recruited me, and I said, Shirley, did you see that article in the Three Village Herald? And she said, yeah. I said, did you get any response to it? She said, well, I got some phone calls from emeritus professors. I said, what'd they ask you? She said, well, these were mostly male professors, and they asked me, what kind of love are we talking about? And then I came into this building, and this is a very good medical school, and I'm coming up the escalator, and there's a guy up at the top of the escalator with his arms, like Mr. Clean, and he's looking down at me, and I've never seen him before. And I said, sir, do I know you? And he said, are you Dr. Post? He had a very Eastern European accent. And I said, yeah, I am. And he said, obviously having read the Three Village Herald, are you going to save us? This is a great famous biochemist. And I said, well, I'm not sure of that, sir, but it's good to be here, and I'll do my best. But the thing you have to realize is that difficult things are always happening if you're honest about life. And you can't just go down into this negative vortex of bitterness and hostility, because that's so bad for you, and it's bad for the people around you. So you have to win with love. You don't have a choice. You have to win with love. And I think I've won with love here and done really well over these years. But that first day was a time when I realized, I don't have much control over so much in this journey of mine. And I want to win with love. And if you take that attitude, you can overcome a lot of difficulties.
I'm glad you acknowledged that difficulty is part of our path. Mm-hmm. This path is not without difficulty. It's inherently set up that way.
Yeah.
We've come in and we've been given these human minds that are selfish, mm-hmm. and want gain and want to hoard resources for survival, and then that are one day going to die. And that creates all these challenges, that nothing lasts forever and all things eventually go away in this world. And yet love never fails.
Yeah, it never fails. And the interesting thing too is that, some people think we're put on this earth to experience happiness. And there's such a literature around happiness, and it's a good concept. Depends on what people mean by happiness, of course. But, life isn't that simple. Maybe what we have is we're thrown into a very challenging journey, and our job is to grow. And our job is to stick with love if we can, no matter what, and not allow ourselves to get sucked down into this negative, seething, boiling cauldron, which is easy to do. So we have to win with love and go forward. And there is suffering, and of course sometimes the suffering is because we're so attached to various things. That's more of a Buddhist idea. But I didn't like leaving from Cleveland to Stony Brook. I loved Cleveland. I know you can't believe that, but some people really do love Cleveland. And I had a lot of friends there. I wrote a few reflections about the challenges of relocating and even having to find a new dentist, and, how difficult it was to get reattached to community. And Victor Chan, who's written a lot of books with the Dalai Lama, he lives out in Vancouver. He had me out there to the Dalai Lama Center to give some talks on love and suffering. And as I was talking about this experience, he stood up and he said, "You know what your problem is? You were too attached to Cleveland."
Mm.
And that's basically true. I mean, and nothing that we can attach to is permanent. So impermanence is such a reality. And we just have to figure out how to live with that and navigate reattachment in different environments. But I feel like, yeah, I mean, our happiness in America can't just be a big, wide, glib smile all the time. I think it has to come more from inner peace, more of a joy that comes from just finding within ourselves a connection with this one mind, or whatever you want to call it.
So as you were saying that that you were called out for being too attached to Cleveland.
Yeah.
I think that really is the basis of all of our suffering. Of course, is this attachment and aversion. But I'm too attached to my wife being alive and to my children being alive. You know, I'm too attached to having the ability to care for myself. And I'm not necessarily looking to get rid of those attachments.
So you're right. I mean, by human nature, we should and we must be attached to the near and dear, to our environment. We have to have a sense of, I think, pride in our environment and in our families. I'm a big family man. But still, like the Buddha said, or like Soren Kierkegaard said in The Concept of Anxiety, the great existentialist book, he said, at some level, underneath all of our happiness, we know there will come a time when the things that we love most, that bring most joy into our lives, they may disappear. I mean, people are finite, they're mortal creatures, however much the biological community is trying to figure out eternal life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that'll happen. So we have to realize that, we have attachments and we need to have them because we're human and they're beautiful things. But at some point, we're going to move on, or they're going to move on. And it's just a matter of being able to accept that. Sometimes, I do a lot of clinical pastoral care in hospitals around here. And so many people say, how could this happen to me? My son has died, or my spouse, or my best friend. How could God let this happen? Well, see, that's a very modern question. It's only in the last 100 years or so that anybody's even asked that, because they kind of realize that, limits and mortality and suffering come with the territory of life. And so we shouldn't be challenging the existence of, quote unquote, God over these things. We should just recognize that this is the nature of human existence. We're not going to get away from it. No one gets out of life alive. Have you noticed?
I have noticed. And I would rather love deeply and have loss,
Yeah,
than to never love deeply, to avoid the loss.
100%.
And if things were not temporary, they would be less special. So it's actually the temporary existence of all of life, I think, that adds so much specialness to it, because we know that these relationships do not last for eternity, and maybe they do in a different way, but not on this plane.
No.
And so then to cherish every moment, and then to come back to this present and say, okay, love never fails. I'm going to go ahead and show up in love in this moment. I'm going to give, because the more I give, in each opportunity that's presented, and in each individual moment that's presented, the better it will be for me and all. And man, Stephen, your work is just so profound, and it's been a pleasure to have this conversation. And I wanted to get to a couple of the lessons that you learned from Sir John Templeton. What is one, like, overarching thing that he really kind of shifted your consciousness on from your time with him?
Well, the first time I met Sir John was in the lobby of a hotel not too far from Dulles Airport, and it was about 1990. It was a conference on spirituality, religion, and health. And he was a big advocate for the ways in which spiritual practice can benefit our mental and physical health. And he lived to be about 96, I guess, and he was always very full of energy. One of my friends, a psychiatrist named David Larson, pointed into the lobby and said, "There's Sir John." Sir John was sponsoring this conference, but I had not met him yet. So he said, "Why don't you go sit down with him?" And I sat down with Sir John, and he took such a gentle and curious interest in my life. It was amazing. He was a very, very loving and very, very humble guy. And we started talking about agape love, which is the Christian term for this unconditional love. And right to the heart of it, we agreed that we didn't think it was a human capacity, that we thought it was really a gift. And we also agreed that the mind was a gift. And that's when he told me about the Christmas card that he sent out sometime, years earlier to all of his investors saying, "Do you know that your mind is a gift?" If people knew their mind was a gift, I don't think they would squander it so much. They wouldn't necessarily destroy themselves. They wouldn't hurt their brains. If they knew their mind was a gift, they would want to be as creative as they could in loving ways to benefit others, to contribute to the lives of others. So Sir John and I were just, we just got this business of love and giving and inner peace. And he also wrote a lot about the idea of one mind. He was a big proponent of that concept. He was raised a Presbyterian, but his ideas were very broad. And he was true to Presbyterianism in his own way, as I'm an Episcopalian, but also, there was something that we were looking at that was beyond maybe what some people would be interested in.
Yeah, and Jesus also spoke of unconditional love as the way and the path, and love your neighbor, love your enemy, and forgive anyone that you feel has wronged you.
Yeah. And for me, by the way, that whole business of love your enemy, I've never written much about loving your enemy. I've had a few adversaries, but I consider my adversaries to be my friends because they bring out the best in me, right? I mean, where would Joseph have gotten to without his brother who threw him into the hole and sold him to the slave traders and dumped him in Egypt, and he became everything he became? I mean, you got to have, where would David be without Goliath? I mean, you got to have adversaries. And even Jesus, I mean, Easter season just being over, he was betrayed by his best friend, right? I mean, and he winds up getting crucified. But through all of that process, he has a sense that this is somehow mysteriously the will of God. He's not saying, "Why is this happening to me?"
No, well,
A little bit.
My father, why do you forsake me?
Yeah, but then a few verses later, he comes down and he acknowledges that this is the thing. It was very surprising for him. I have no question that it was surprising for him, but that he went with such grace, and his last words, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do."
Oh, I know. I love that example is the example of unconditional love. I mean, to be in that agonizing position and to be forgiving the people as they're doing it is beautiful. And that's what we're talking about. And all great religions point to that same thing. And I happen to agree with you. I don't think we really have enemies. I think we have people playing a part to help us grow.
Yeah, so we think a lot alike. And so I have a book called Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People, which came out with Johns Hopkins about a year ago. It's done nicely. And it's about people with dementia, how caregivers can manage the challenges of Alzheimer's disease. And it's not, there's a passage in St. Paul: "Nothing can separate us from the love of God."
Mm.
And I believe that totally. So it's not so much enemies that I worry about, but can I love people who are so cognitively imperiled and complicated in their care? And so I write a lot. I've done a lot of things with caregivers over the last 35 years. That's been my test. That's what I've wanted to say, is that when we really talk about love, we're talking about all humanity, not just people who are cognitively intact, but people who may be differently able. They may have cognitive developmental disabilities. They may have dementia secondary to Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or stroke or whatever it could be. But we have to love everybody. Love always wins. You always win with love. And so that book with Hopkins is really a book about love for the deeply forgetful and what goes into that. It's very complicated and it's not simple. But I'm telling you, if you can love someone who a lot of times during the day seems like a shell or a husk or gone or absent or whatever, if you can take the time to notice the hints of continuing self-identity, if you can sing with them, I say that to caregivers, sing a song with your loved one and be open to surprises, because not infrequently they'll actually chime in for at least a few words or a line. You have to realize that they're opaque. It's hard to see the lines of their identity, but it's there underneath. And because they're part of this one mind, they have a soul, if you will. You can never say that that they're less worthy of our love than anyone else. So I have a great mentor from Detroit, an African-American minister, and about a year ago, his sister died of Alzheimer's disease. And he called me on the phone and he said, do you know, is she still there? And I said, Pastor, what's your feeling about it? He said, well, you know what I think? I think she's already gone down to the Detroit Amtrak station, and she's got one foot on that blessed train for glory. He was a Baptist, and so you think she's ahead of us? And he said, yeah. Why should I think anything else?
It's beautiful. And this conversation has been beautiful, and your work is as well. I've just really enjoyed it. And if you are interested in meditating on Dr. Stephen's 8 kindness and affirmations, I'll be happy to send you a copy. Go to goodmoodshow.com and register for the newsletter if you're not already part of it, and we'll send them out. And Stephen, I'm sure there's people that are going to want to learn more from you after this conversation. How could people get in touch and learn more?
Well, the best thing is, I have a personal website that I keep pretty up to date. Stephen with a PH, Stephen G. Post at stephengpost.com. They can even email me at stephengpost@gmail.com. And also, I have an institute website. Sir John and I founded an institute. It's called the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. There you go. And the website is unlimitedloveinstitute.org. And we just rebuilt it, actually, so it's got a lot of very current stuff. But we've been fortunate. I've been able to work with hundreds of people around the country, around the world, doing big events in Japan and Oxford and Australia, and it's been great. And Sir John, it's funny. I was in my office at Case Western in the medical school. I got a fax from Sir John because he liked to fax. He didn't like emailing. He was too old for it. But it said, we should start an institute to study the greatest asset in human experience: unlimited love. And I faxed back. I said, Sir John, that's great. What should we call it? He said, the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. And I had a moment of trepidation because I at the time actually had a genetics grant from the NIH to do Alzheimer's stuff. And I thought, what are my friends going to think about this? Aha, they were my adversaries, but that ended quickly. They brought out the best. So I faxed back, Sir John, maybe we should call it the Institute for the Study of Creative Altruism, because altruism is a very dry, sciencey word for social science, for biology,
Yes.
genetics. And I thought I'd have an easier time. He faxed back, and he was so correct. He said, no, unlimited love, up to $8.9 million. And I faxed back, Matt, Sir John, I just love that language. It jumps right off the page. He was right, because it allowed a bridge with the spiritual traditions and the scientific traditions.
Yes.
It was completely correct. And so, life, you run into people who they're just the perfect person at the perfect time. And that was synchronicity. That was the divine rhythm of life, and Sir John will always be a big part of my journey.
And thank you for sharing with my journey. You've certainly opened my heart, and I couldn't pick a better topic than to talk about unlimited love and giving with you today.
Well, you've been a fabulous host. You've been very tolerant of my escapades.
Oh, it's been enjoyable. And I'm sure the person listening has enjoyed too. So thank you so much. And thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you guys next week.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right.